welcome to this virtual meeting of the Health Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Shoaib Akhtar and I will be chairing the meeting. Regulations have temporarily removed the legal requirement for local authorities to hold public meetings in person, but the Council is still required to make meetings accessible to the public, and this live stream enables the Council to still make effective and transparent decisions on the delivery of services for residents. If a connection to a member is lost during this meeting, I will stop the meeting to enable the connection to be restored. If the connection cannot be restored within a reasonable time, the meeting will proceed, but the member who has disconnected will not be able to vote on the matter under discussion, as they would not have heard all the facts. Should any aspect of the external link fail, I may call a short adjournment of up to 5 minutes or so to determine whether the connection can quickly be re-established either by video technology or telephone in the alternative. If the connection is restored within that time, the meeting will be adjourned and any further business will not proceed until another time and date. Firstly, can I ask the clerk to confirm the members' attendance?
Councillor Alias?
Present.
Councillor Byrne? Councillor Byrne?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hamblett?
Present.
Councillor Ibrahim?
Present.
Councillor McLaren?
Present.
Councillor Tor?
Present.
And Councillor Akhtar?
Present. We also have representatives from the Northern Care Alliance, and Oldham CCG, along with council officers in attendance. Where the committee is required to take a vote on a report for approval, or if we are making a substantive recommendation, each member will be individually asked to state whether they are for, against, or abstaining. When a report is for noting, I will only ask if any member does not agree. As with all committee meetings, should it be necessary to exclude the press and public, once the exclusion has been moved, and the public will no longer be able to view the meeting. Can I ask members who wish to indicate using the chat function? If we can turn now to the agenda, and for the benefit of those members of the public watching, the full agenda pack is available on the council's website. Item 1, do we have any apologies for absence?
We received apologies from Councillor Cosgrove.
Okay, thank you, that's noted. Item 2, do we have any urgent business? There are
no items of urgent business, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3, do members wish to make any declarations of interest? I suppose there's none. Item 4, have we received any public questions?
No public questions have been received, Chair.
Thanks. Item 5, members have before them the minutes of our last meeting held on 26th of January. Are these agreed as an accurate record?
Move the minutes, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren.
Agreed.
Does any member not agree? No. Thank you. The minutes are agreed. Item 6 is the minutes of the meeting of the Joint Health Scrutiny Panel for Pennine Care NHS Trust held on 21st of January, submitted for information. Does any member wish to comment on these minutes? No? Can we note these minutes?
Noted, Chair.
Does any member disagree? Thank you. The minutes are noted. Item 7, the next item is an update on development of early help, a report we asked for our meeting in September last year. Bruce Penhill is here to present the report and seeking any views members may have on how to further strengthen the early help offer. Bruce, would you like to present the report to us?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll just run briefly through the kind of key things from the report. To early help, there's been so the last 6 months we've had a lot of change in early help, and I'll just sort of talk you through that and the significance of the changes we've introduced. But the first thing is just to emphasise that early help has a statutory basis under working together to safeguard children. So there's a requirement for us to provide early support for children and families, so that we provide support as soon as a problem emerges at any point in a child's life, from the foundation years through to the teenage years. So it's trying to intervene early in order to prevent problems escalating. In support of that, the children's safeguarding, all children's safeguarding partnerships have to have a document which is kind of setting out what the approach is and how needs at different levels of need are met. It's called the Continuum of Need document, and that's just recently been refreshed. There's a sort of set of principles underpinning that, which I just wanted to run through because they're really key. One is that early help is everybody's business, because there's been a tendency to view early help as it's just some teams within the council, and it's actually every organisation has a part to play in delivering early help at all levels of need. So schools, GPs, range of council services, police, we've all got a responsibility as part of delivering early help. Second thing is about that the voice and lived experience of children and young people is absolutely central to it. So in determining what early help support is needed, it's listening to young people, thinking about and thinking about their voice and lived experience, and making sure that we're tailoring the support to their needs. Third thing is about providing the earliest possible help, because the earlier we intervene, the earlier that intervention, the better, the more effective it's going to be, and we prevent problems getting worse and young people being put in worse situations. The fourth one is about better outcomes being secured by practitioners from different disciplines working together collaboratively in partnership. So often the family might have some needs. It's not something that, say, a health partner can resolve on their own, but actually working with the school, maybe working with social care, working together, we can achieve much better outcomes. So that joined up working is really important. And then finally, about working with children and families to support change. So it's building people's capacity to help themselves rather than a culture of doing things for them. So we're helping to prevent people needing further support in the future by helping to build their capacity. It's in relation to the Continuum of Need document, which has now been agreed by the Safeguarding Children's Partnership. There's four levels of support. So the first one is universal level. So this is, what's provided within families themselves, by schools, by health services. So this is single agencies working on their own, and the offer that's available to all children and families. Then we get into universal plus level, so we call it the earliest possible help level, and this is where two or more partners are working together to support children and families. So it might be, say, that a child's not attending school gets into discussion with the families, and actually they're finding out there's some other issues, and it might be that they work with housing or they work with a health visitor in resolving that. So at that level, you've got two partners working together. Good practices to do an early help assessment, and they should have a plan for how they're going to support the family. So it's very much built on people who've got a really good existing relationship with families. They know them well already. They're really well placed to provide that immediate support. In some cases, though, the need might continue to escalate, and that's the point where we get into targeted early help. So this is where the support then becomes led by a specific early help worker, which would either be within the council or the Positive Steps team. So this is the actual early help teams. In order to access this, we ask that partners put a referral in through the multi-agency safeguarding hub, and that's so that if there's any safeguarding concerns, it's got the social care oversight of it. They can assess whether it needs to be picked up by social care or whether it goes back to the early help teams. So at that level, we've got a dedicated worker who's like the lead professional for that family. They can pull in other professionals as needed, and they might work with a family for say 3 to 6 months with a kind of coordinated plan around trying to help the family to address their needs and prevent them escalating further. And at the top level of the continuum of need, we've got children's social care. So this is the point where it's hit the statutory thresholds under the Children Act, and it might either be we either got a child in need at Section 17 of the Children Act, or if the child's at risk of significant harm, then we're into Section 47 and the child protection procedures. So that the refresh of the continuum of need document's been a really key development, because it's been really clear about what the roles are at different levels and what the expectations of different teams and partners are. Just in relation to the development of that, we've been going through an internal reorganisation of our targeted early help teams, and this links to the wider move to a district model of working. So as of the 1st of April, sorry, I'm just noting it says 31st of April in the report. It's as of the 1st of April, we'll have a new team structure in place. So instead of having quite a sort of complicated setup around teams with different roles at different levels of need, what we've got is 5 teams, one for each part of the borough, so the 5 districts, and each of those has a team manager, a set of family workers who are the caseworkers who work with families, and then also 2 members of staff who are partnership officers, and their role is to support the other partners in the district, so like schools and health visitors, helping them to play their part. And the family workers will work at different levels. So it's either at early help level before social care being involved. Sometimes we need to provide support alongside social workers. So the social worker might be doing an assessment, but needs some work done on parenting with the family. So the family worker could do that. Or when a family's been open to social care, they're not at that level of need anymore, but it's stepping down to a targeted early help worker, maybe to complete some pieces of work before they step down completely. So our district targeted early help workers will work at any of those 3 levels, and part of why that change is important is it reduces the need to hand off families from one worker to another, which was a risk under the previous model. So what we're trying to do is ensure better continuity for children and families. Another change as part of it is that we've created an integrated children's services MASH team. So in the past we used to have separate contacts coming into the MASH for ones where a referrer thought it was for early help, and ones where they thought it was for children's social care, and that was handled by separate teams who sat very closely together and communicated a lot, but they were fundamentally separate teams. What we've now got is one stream into the MASH, one team that are assessing them. So when they first come in, the first person who look at it is the children's social care manager. If there's a safeguarding need, whisk it straight off, gets a really fast response. If it's at a lower level, they can do that, so it'll still be assessed within 24 hours. But they gather the bits of additional information, so it's determining what's the appropriate level of support that's needed. So it's giving us a system which is able to manage a large volume of inquiries through the MASH, but handling them all in a really timely way. Just so sort of flagging up some further areas of development. So obviously we're going live with the district model in April. There's some work going on around the development of a better parenting offer. We're refreshing our early help strategy, which will set out kind of clearly what our arrangements are. And as part of that, we're recognising that the district offer, it's a kind of step on the journey, and actually we think we're going to be able to join together some more teams in order to provide a better integrated approach at a district level. So that's something that we'll be working on during the current year. And then also looking at getting some locality governance, so potentially replacing the children's centre district advisory boards with a kind of children and young people's partnership in each of the districts, so where we can work together and say what are our priorities for work with children and young people. So finally, just at the back end of the report, there's a bit of data on just showing the numbers of early help referrals. I suppose the thing I'd want to highlight is when COVID first kicked in, we had a sudden drop off in the number of referrals. I think partly because the children weren't going to school and there wasn't that visibility of children to some of the partners that make a lot of referrals. That then picked up during the year, so in parts of the autumn had really high numbers of early help referrals, dipped again at Christmas, but literally just seeing today the figures for February, and we're back up again. So we've seen some really significant demand on our early help teams during the COVID period, after that initial dip when there was reasons why we weren't getting the referral. So I've tried to give you a bit of a flavour of how things have been developing in relation to early help, and also some ideas about where we're going next. So very much welcome any questions or contributions or suggestions for the way forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bruce. Are there any comments or questions for Bruce from members? No. Councillor Alias? You're on mute.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Bruce, for the update. That was quite useful. Just one thing, maybe, I don't know, I'm not reading it right, or I'm getting a bit confused, where obviously we're reorganizing teams to deliver on a district model. But at the same time, we're also looking at prioritizing according to the evidence of need. And I know in some of the districts, we've got wards at very affluent level where there's not a great deal of need for early help, whereas at the other end of the same district, there is a lot more a greater need. So how will we kind of balance that in a particular district where we got a deprived ward at one end and quite an affluent ward at the other end, and they don't need the same levels of service, I think?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Yeah, a really good question. I should have mentioned that in doing the restructure, one of the things we've looked at is in relation to the teams, is we've got figures on the demand, like by ward and by district. And so what we do is allocate caseworkers accordingly. So, for example, the North District has a lower number of a history of having a lower number of early help referrals than some of the other districts. So we'll reflect that in the team allocation. Clearly, if you had, so the new East District it's really big and ranging. You've got some like parts of Saddleworth, but also you've got like St James's and Waterhead wards, which have some really high demand areas in. So the team manager for that area will be, as the cases come through, we'll be allocating workers to do workers, as cases come in. So it will be driven by the demand coming into it, and clearly we'll review it as time goes on. If we find that we've got the allocation of workers wrong, we'll end up moving them around. But also I think we'll have slightly blurred boundaries as well. So for example, quite often you might find that we might get, say, a referral in from a school and they've got children the children are in a different area. So we're going to have slightly flexible boundaries. The key thing will be what we want is to provide a really responsive service to children and families. Organising around districts, we think, helps to do that. But what we won't have is really hard boundaries that make us inflexible in responding to the needs of families, because the key thing is that we're looking after our children and families. Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor McLaren and then Councillor Hamlet.
Thank you, Chair. Bruce, we've taken a lot of interest in MASH in the past, as it were, and like many council services, it's undergoing an ongoing, if you like, almost period of reorganisation. We wonder whether the end is in sight sometimes, but we'll wait and see. But what I am interested in, Chair, is the financial implications, and whether you could give us any indication as to what the current load is at each of the 4 levels, maybe on a borough-wide basis rather than a district basis at this stage. But what the situation is in terms of staffing. Whether all the positions are actually filled, or whether we still have vacancies, or whether we're faced with a situation arising from the budget where there may be some pressure on the staff as a result of possible voluntary redundancies, etc., or other reorganisation. Just to what extent are we is our complement of staff in place in order to meet the demands that are likely to be placed on them?
Okay, so this is in relation to the staff in the targeted early help bit, because that's the bit that's been that's the service that's been reorganising. Actually, probably what I should have said is there's two bits to that. There's the in-house teams, and then there's an all-age early intervention service which Positive Steps deliver. They got the new commission just before Christmas and went live in January, and they're also organised around their 5 areas. They've been through a restructuring process, and they've just got their teams fully up to speed. So they've got around 25 caseworkers in that team, and they're allocated to 5 areas. We're mid restructure at the moment in the internal Family Connect service. The budget proposals where it was a very, very slight saving, but to all intents and purposes it was cost neutral, and we're moving staff between teams. And prior to, in the build up to that, we've been holding some vacancies in order to basically to try and prevent redundancies. So we're in the process at the moment of moving staff into the new roles.
Right.
I think obviously over the next couple of weeks that process will be complete. I think we'll end that with probably a very small number of vacancies that we'll need to that we'll need to fill, like at the kind of like 2 or 3 level, possibly not even that. So we're sort of quite close to having the full complement. We haven't got everyone into the new posts yet. What I would say is that there's a lot of pressures on the service. So, for example, our intensive casework team at the moment, they deliver work up to 6 months, ideally visiting families up to 3 times a week. Under COVID, they've seen a lot of demand. At the moment, we're just trying to support as many families where there's need are. We support as many families as we are. Their caseloads are such that we're not able to offer the usual intensity of offer because we just don't have the capacity to do it. Sure. So we've seen as you'll be aware, COVID's placed a lot of pressure on families, sure, and that then transmits down the line. So we see a lot of demand on our service, and it's the same in social care as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Bruce. Councillor Hamlet and then Councillor Torr.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you very much for your roundup earlier. So I've got 3 very specific questions, and they're rather short. So you mentioned some of the districts obviously having caseworkers, and obviously we've got North, and then eventually we've got East District. Now, obviously, of course, the 2 districts are completely different, as Councillor Ali has already alluded to. But of course, as you said, East District will be quite big. So will that mean that you'll obviously have more staff members within them to cover that area? Because you don't want one particular staff member trying to cover a big area. And obviously, different parts of that district is going to be very different within it. So that was my other bit. And then the next question is, will the central part of your part of MASH, will that still be pertaining centrally? Because of course all the information will be then collated in a central area. And lastly, I've partly forgotten that last bit of questions, so I do apologise, Chair. But lastly, of course, you did mention regarding the amount of high volume that you've had in, but of course, does that mean to say that, when it comes to your recruitment processes, does that mean that you will then have to require specific people to manage that? And does that mean that you're having to wait longer to recruit those, or are you having to, or can you be able to train in-house as well to cover those particular gaps? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Right, so pick up just in relation to the districts, I suppose we're driven by the number of cases, so it's just reflecting the new districts vary a lot in size. So the central, because they're based on having something like a roughly even population. So the east one is geographically much bigger, and the central one is geographically much smaller. But our numbers of caseworkers is based on the demand that's coming from the air. So that if like the number of families that we're needing to support, and then in sort of filling the post within the service, we're asking. There's a combination of like asking workers about preferences. So it may be for example, that they've got an area that they've worked in before that they'd like to work in, or that they've got particular skills or like language skills that are useful for a particular area. Their roles are very much now, and it's been helped by sort of the changes to moving online. So we're much less based in a single location, so based in the civic centre, going out from there. So there's much more now. Their roles, as the family workers, they're going out to people's homes. They might then have days when they're working at home, catching up on the paperwork. So actually, it's enabling us to operate in a more flexible way, and that helps in covering some of the larger districts. So I think the driver for the number of workers in each district is the number of cases rather than the size of the area. Your second question was about MASH. So that's staying centrally, and part of why that's really important is to maintain the social care oversight of all the cases. So we've got consistent practice, and if there's safeguarding risk, you've got a social worker who's got oversight of that. But a positive development has been that early help has moved into Mosaic, which is the same casework system as social care. So it's then actually really helpful because you can see casework in other cases. So from an early help point of view, you can see the history of social work involvement, or the other way around, say in MASH, that if they're considering, does this need to go to social care, it might be that there's a certain level of need they're looking at, but then they can see actually there's been loads and loads of early help work done, things haven't improved, actually probably on balance this does need to go to social care. So having that sort of integrated oversight is helped by us all being in the same in the same casework system. Sorry, I can't read me writing, but what was your last question again?
Sorry, it was just in regards to, obviously, Councillor McLaren was obviously alluding to the fact that recruitment retainment and the recruitment process, of whether you'd be training and recruiting in-house as well as externally as well. So it was just really. Okay, so I think in the first instance we'll be looking in-house, obviously, particularly at the moment, because we're in a period where people are being redeployed, and actually with some of the changes we're going to have to do a lot of training and development of the staff already, because we're looking at staff who are coming from different teams who've got some different histories. Whether people are coming internally or having to recruit externally, for workers who are doing this work with families, we're going to be investing a lot in their development anyway, because what we want is them to have a really rich toolbox of skills and techniques that they can use. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Tor.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Bruce, for the detailed presentation. My question is that how do we monitor BME or hard to reach referrals or the data? Is it just by the phone calls? Because I know because of COVID and lockdown, there is a different sort of the way you used to get referrals is, but I think especially BME community, hard to reach communities, because I know, like, for example, domestic violence, especially towards BME women, there's not really a separate data, but they've got data for like overall domestic violence cases. So I just want to sort of keen to know for BME referrals, how do we monitor, how do we pick that? Is compared to before the lockdown, is this the same or is it different, or are we keeping a separate data? Are we picking up? Is it sort of is slow, or are we doing anything about it? Thank you.
Okay, so just in terms of the systems, it's so for all the kind of the early help referrals, it's so that that systems information about ethnic origin is recorded. However, it's not as consistently recorded as we want. So that's one of the things in our one of the data quality issues that we're working on. So what we're not able to do at the moment is to really track it very effectively, but that's as part of our performance improvement. That's something that the kind of the managing director, my director Elaine Devane, are very much pushing on. We need to improve the data quality in order to be able to track the trends in that much better. And that might be something, maybe if you wanted me to come back to a future meeting, that might be something that I could specifically report on. So we've got data on take up by ethnic origin of early help services, but it's not as comprehensive as I'd like yet, and that's something, as I say, something that we're working on.
Chair, I think I'll be very keen to get updates in the future if that's okay.
Yeah, could do that back to a future meeting. Thank you for that, Bruce. And obviously, I think in terms of collating the data by sort of local demographics will be quite useful just to look at in terms of take up and where the gaps are, and then I suppose we'll be able to improve the service accordingly. Earlier on in your presentation, you mentioned the fact that we'll be holding some parenting skills. My suggestion would be that if we don't call it parenting skills training, if we can call it something else, because I think sometimes it's quite off-putting, and it could put some parents off if we call it parenting skills. If we can use some other kind of hook to get parents to come to the training, and then as part of that, we can sort of skill them up. I think that'll be better, because people don't want to be saying, "Oh, I'm going to parenting skills training," if you understand what I mean. And the other one was in terms of whether I'm hoping that you'll be doing a similar presentation to the districts, and then bringing that view back to us, saying what the districts have, what the consultation with the districts has been.
Yeah, and actually something I should have mentioned is what. So one of the things when our new district team managers get into place, one of the things that they'll be asked to do is to kind of get out, get to know all the partners in the ward, make themselves known to you as councillors, so that you know this is the lead person for early help in your district. Yes. If you've got any questions about it, you know who the team are and how to communicate with them. And I absolutely pick up your point about how we communicate with people about what the support offer is, and framing it in a way which doesn't put them off. Yeah, it's a point well made. And finally, just to say, obviously, as we move to districts, for all the cases, we will know kind of what ward and district they're in. So that's something we're going to be able to track over time. And we'll be wanting to look at how our different teams perform in terms of the outcomes that they get. Are we getting better results in terms of reduced re-referral rates in particular areas? And if so, why is that? So this move comes with a big drive around improving our performance.
That's excellent. Councillor McLaren, you had your hand up again. Is that
just one point? Just back to how your team manager and the 5 teams, etc., how they're going to work with the district. Are they going to be in the same law, going to be making some use of the children's centres, and do we know what the outcome might be in terms of the future of the district advisory boards and what their role might be in the future?
Okay, so a couple of things there. So one is about assets. So there's an ongoing discussion about which clearly kind of you as members will be contributing to, about what happens with our assets, and do we have if you like hubs where a range of services are delivered from, and then either the same buildings or potentially other buildings such as children's centres where we actually get families coming in to where a whole range of partners can deliver a range of services. So I think probably at the moment we're not getting as much out of the children's centres as we could. At the moment there's a lot of health staff who are based in children's centres, and actually it's like, well, how do we get better use out of those and actually get more children and families coming in there? So there's a lot to be decided about in relation to how we use our buildings. I think it's looking at like some sort of hub and spoke model. So from the point of view of my teams, I think under COVID we've got used to using teams, so I think they'll be spending a lot less time office based. A lot of their work anyway is going out and in working with families in their homes. So I think we'll be looking at kind of touchdown points in the hubs in the districts, but I'd expect them, they're out there working with the families, and then if they're delivering some courses or group work, then we'd wanting to use whatever facilities we set up that's there for the families. In relation to district advisory boards, Again, that's not sorted yet. I think I trailed in the report that what proposing is to have a sort of district children and families board, which is looking at, well, how collectively do we meet the need of children and families? So rather than just focusing on children's centres management, it's saying, okay, in this district, these are some particular issues for us around, you know, be it, you know, high rates of domestic abuse, or we've got high rates of obesity in children. How do we collectively, as a set of partners, all respond to those? So it's having a forum where we're looking at the data and thinking about, well, how can we make our systems work better so that we get better results for children and families?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Bruce. I don't think there's any further hands up. Oh, Councillor Hamlet,
Sorry, just a quick one. I just wanted to ask regarding transitions. Will you still be covering transitions from young adults to adults? Will that still be ongoing, or is that still something that has to be thrashed out between yourself and adults? I just wanted to ask that question, because if there's a safeguarding issue when the class is a young adult and then the transition over, what happens then, or is that still to be determined?
Obviously, so more generally, there's a lot of work going on around transition. So it's, you know, a big issue for health services and for children and adults social care. I mean, certainly from the point of view of for the targeted early help services that I manage, we're generally, it's like a sort of shorter term intervention. So it might be, you know, 3 to 6 months. So expectation of my team is, I don't know, say we're working from a 17-year-old with a 17-year-old and they hit their 18th birthday, we'll see the piece of work through. There's no way we'd go like, sorry mate, it's your birthday. We'd see that piece of work through, and then we'd be looking at stepping down to the appropriate support service, whether at the time they're still a child or they're an adult. So we're kind of very mindful of transitions, but clearly there's a much bigger issue around that in relation to some other services. So particularly around like children with disabilities and the transitions that they make.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Don't think there's any further hands up. So members, the recommendation in the report is for us to note the developing approach to the multi-agency early help offer. Is that moved? You're on mute.
Move it, Chair. Sorry, yeah.
Is that seconded as well?
Yeah, second that.
Thank you for that. Are we happy to agree that?
Yeah.
Does any member disagree? Now's their chance to speak. Okay, thank you for that. The report is noted. Bruce, thank you very much for coming along this evening, presenting the report to us. You're more than welcome to stay with us for the rest of the meeting, but we won't hold it against you if you do want to go.
Thanks very much, Chair. I think I'll go now, but thanks for the questions.
Okay. Right, cheers. Right. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Right, member. Item 8 is an update on the Pennine Acute Transaction Programme, a report we asked for at our meeting in October last year. To introduce the report, we have David. Is it Jago or Jago? Sorry. Jago, sorry. Perfect. Pennine Acute Chief Officer. Over to you, David.
Evening, and thank you for the invitation to present an update on the transaction at tonight's scrutiny meeting. I'll take it that colleagues have read the brief update in the 2 pages that are contained within the reporting pack. Just to outline, the transaction is a new ownership model. It would see 2 legally separate but intrinsically linked transactions, and the whole aim of the transactions is to support the future clinical, financial and workforce sustainability of acute hospital services in the North East sector and across Greater Manchester. The transaction essentially consists of Manchester Foundation Trust acquiring North Manchester General Hospital and Salford Royal Foundation Trust, now known as the Northern Care Alliance, acquiring Royal Oldham, Fairfield and Rochdale Infirmary. We are now technically ready to deliver safe disaggregation and separation of the Pennine acute sites and services on the 1st of April 2021, as was originally planned. However, due to the pandemic and the complexity of the NCA aspect of the transaction, the NCA have asked for an extension of up to 6 months to formally complete their legal part of the transaction. It's important to note that the NCA journey has been supported by the transaction programme over the last 3.5 years, prepare for formal change in ownership across those sites, with the NCA group having made existing significant improvements across Pennine services over the last 5 years in terms of that. So we are technically ready for a safe disaggregation, but given the disruption from the pandemic over the last 12 months and the impact that it's had, we have formally requested a 6-month, up to 6-month extension from our regulators, NSSE and I. The provision of patient services remains unaffected by this new phased approach, and agreement of staff alignment to either MFT or SRFT NCA is continuing and engaging with staff side unions in terms of that. So we will be enacting a 2-phased approach to complete the PAT transaction and final dissolution of the legal entity Pennine Acute Trust by no later than the end of September 2021. Phase 1 we'll see on the 1st of April 2021, services will be disaggregated as planned so that MFT can formally acquire North Manchester General Hospital by what is known as a commercial transfer. Phase 2 of the transaction, the legal aspects of transfer of Oldham, Rochdale and Bury Care organisations to the Northern Care Alliance as a statutory legal entity, will be completed before the 30th September 2021. And this will see the formal establishment of the Northern Care Alliance and the final dissolution of Pennine Acute Trust, subject to approval by regulators and the Secretary of State for Health. In terms of where we're at, we are continuing to work with staff alignment and transfer. This is drawn to conclusion. Salford Royal and MFT are reviewing final remaining staff lists. We have been supporting all staff involved in this transaction, making sure that individual managers have one-to-one conversations with those affected by it to make sure that we can hear to all concerns, etc., and strong communication around advice and support and staff briefings with weekly transaction updates to our colleagues. That's the overall summary of where we're at with the transaction as it points to this moment in time. Happy to take any questions or comments from colleagues.
Do any members have any comments or questions? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder, David, if you could give us an indication in terms of the overall financial position, because we have been wrestling with a budget deficit for a while, and I'm not sure that we've finally resolved that particular issue. So, if so, I wonder if perhaps you could clarify the position and how the debt, if you like, or the balance, we'll call it the balance for the moment, of outstanding liabilities, if that's the correct phrase, might be addressed in terms of how it's been apportioned between the new Northern Care Alliance, as it were, and the new Manchester Foundation Trust, if that's an accurate breakdown of the situation, and how that might be addressed on an ongoing basis, certainly up for the next 6 months and possibly beyond, if that need is still there.
Thank you, Councillor, and if I could answer that question. So you're quite right in terms of historically we've seen a significant deficit within the Pennine Acute Hospital Trust. Part of the transaction involves a medium financial term plan that will be signed off by our regulators as part of the transaction process. That sees a delivery of a financial programme of improvement and productivity that ultimately will get the new Northern Care Alliance into a sustainable break-even position. With regards to the forthcoming 6 months, as you'll be aware, the financial architecture supporting the NHS has changed quite considerably, essentially moving to what we would call a block capped payment mechanism. That will continue into Q1 of the new financial year 21-22, which starts the 1st of April. I think it's fair to say there's still a productivity challenge for the NCA and Bury and Rochdale and Oldham. Part of the medium financial term plan is to deliver efficiency savings of just over 4% within that financial plan, and that has seen sign off by NSSE and our regulators. So a medium-term financial plan which will restore financial sustainability to what was the old North East, excluding North Manchester General Hospital, and going forward to the Northern Care Alliance.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any Any follow-up questions?
There is, Chair, if no one else
Go ahead.
wishes to, what are the implications therefore in terms of staffing, etc.? I mean, vacancies being carried, etc., or vacancies that might need to be filled, if you like, over this 6-month period and beyond, and what the implications might be also for the capital programme in terms of development of buildings and so forth, how it might affect the three, in particular, the 3 hospitals that will be within the Northern Care Alliance's footprint.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. So essentially, it will continue to be business as usual, where we have vacancies that we need to recruit to maintain safe, clinically effective services. We will continue to recruit to those vacancies across Bury, Rochdale and Oldham. The capital programme is not affected by this, albeit there is a challenge to Greater Manchester in terms of capital programmes for 21-22. Our ambitions certainly outstrip the resources available. Importantly for councillors' attention, Healthy Together Phase 4A, that 28 million development at
I think
Oldham.
we're going to have to, David, we're going to have to put the meeting on hold a minute because we've lost the internet connection.
No, that's fine. I'm back. Thank you. I was just.
Oh, is it yourself, Lewis? Sorry, I thought it was on the public sort of. Right. Okay. Right. Sorry.
So in summary, Councillor McLaren, it will essentially be business as usual. We will continue to carry on as the Northern Care Alliance and provide excellent services across that Northern Care Alliance, and particularly for colleagues here within Oldham over the course of the next 6 months and beyond.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Hamlet and then Mike.
Thank you. Sorry, yeah, apologies. I did lose my internet for a moment. It was, and I think I do recognise you, David, because I met you in another place on the scrutiny meetings. So it was actually a question just in regards to similar one in terms of the finances, because I remember last time, obviously Pennine have had a large deficit and Salford Royal was going to underpin some of the deficits, whilst at the same time they were actually going to plan to build the helipad. Now, I'm not too sure if they're going to go ahead and actually build the said helipad. However, which I don't actually think it's going to go ahead now. I'm not 100% sure. However, if it's the case that they have underpinned some of the deficit and at least helped to make Northern Care Alliance break even, does that mean that whatever the case in regards to North Manchester General, are we still paying for some of the upgrades in regards to North Manchester General, or is that now being done by Central Manchester, and now Central Manchester is taking on the responsibility of the rest of the upgrades, particularly IT upgrades of North Manchester General?
Thank you, Councillor Hamlet. So from the 1st of April, any requirements for capital infrastructure improvements across North Manchester will be the responsibility of Manchester Foundation Trust. They will have a significant investment programme within there, and that includes the rebuild of North Manchester General Hospital at a significant investment ask in terms of that. And that will form part of a wider bid to the regulators and to GM Capital in terms of that. I can't answer your question on the helipad, Councillor Ham, but I'll find that out. But I do know that the acute receiving centre, a significant expansion for Salford, will continue. So all investments around capital and plans will continue, subject to where it's required, loan approvals from NHSEI and the Department of Health and Security. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just want to offer a comment in support of David in the hospital and maybe of this committee too. You know, I think we should make no mistake about it. It is disappointing that we see a 6-month delay in the transaction when we're ready, but it's definitely the right thing to do from a hospital point of view in the light of all the pressures we've got to deal with COVID. However, you know, that's on the basis that this is a complicated and significant transaction for the Northern Care Alliance. The transfer of North Manchester General to MFT by comparison is very straightforward. It might not feel like it, but it's one hospital site with a kind of stripping out of some of the back office services to help them get the efficiencies across the bigger footprint, and therefore it is easier for them. My overriding concern is, and this committee, I would absolutely point us and caution us into this direction. We cannot allow any of the changes that had been planned through the Improving Specialist Care Programme or Healthier Together to be delayed or obfuscated at the benefit of North Manchester General's capital rebuild. We have people in Oldham that are dependent on those site changes, and whilst we've got security of the capital funding for those site changes, I'm fundamentally talking about services which, if we're not careful, could mean they're moved off the Oldham site at the expense of Oldham patients, and they end up travelling quite a long way further for their care, and therefore watering down some of the service array on the Oldham site. So I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say that's definitely going to happen, but I think these are the types of conversations that the Scrutiny Committee ought to be thinking about much more in the near term now.
Thank you for that, Mike. I think in terms of getting up-to-date reports in the future on a regular basis will be useful in terms of how things are moving on, etc. And obviously, like you said, it's a bit disappointing that the actual transaction won't take place for another 6 months. But I think we made some sort of great strides here in terms of where we were, say, a few years ago, and where we are now. And hopefully, things will only get as the saying goes, things will only get better, and I hope so. And obviously, it's down to the hard work of all the team that you have, David. And then if you can take if you can sort of thank your staff members, their hard work, and sort of continued sort of improvement that you've made so far, and I hope it continues. And
thank you, Councillor. I will do so.
Any help or support from us elected members or even from Oldham Council, you're more than welcome to ask for that support, and obviously from the CCG itself as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Mike and the CCG have been incredibly supportive over a really challenging last 12 months, and we've seen examples of partnership working that we'd want to make sure we replicate going forward. Some fantastic work across the Oldham system. So thank you for that, and I'll make sure I give your thanks and encouragement to colleagues after this call.
Thank you for that. The report in front of us, members, was for noting. Is the report noted? I'm assuming there's no other questions or comments.
Just wonderful, given the 6 months delay, whether it might be possible to have an update in 6 months as to where we might be at that stage.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Can I just perhaps recommend something slightly different to that? I definitely don't think we should not agree with that. I wonder if this should be a standing item at each of your next committees for the next 6 months. Okay. And rather than focusing on where is the progress of the transaction, maybe some specific questions to David about what services are configured on what sites and what progress has been made against the Healthier Together programme, which would then just give a bit more structure to it and some certainty and assurance to this committee that the services are on site that need to be there.
Yeah,
I think
happy to agree that, Chair.
That's very useful, Mike. Thank you for that. And I think, David, you can pick and choose what you need to bring to each meeting. We won't dictate that to you at this stage. So I think that's a really good suggestion. So I'm assuming there's no other comments or questions then. Is the report noted? Does any member disagree?
Yeah.
That's brilliant. David, thank you for your attendance this evening. And like I said to Bruce, you're more than welcome to stay with us if you want to.
Thank you, Chair. I might take your kind offer to leave the call now this evening, but I hope you have a fruitful meeting. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you for that.
Bye.
Next item is an update on the NHS developments and planning for 2021 and 22. And Mike Barker is here with us once again. So over to you, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And this is a relatively straightforward paper split into 3 sections, essentially. I was quite keen to give the committee an update on the focus and priorities of the final quarter of this financial year, which takes us to the 31st of March 2021. You'll see in the paper that there's a couple of pages that outline broadly 6 priorities in this period of time. One is the continuation of response to the COVID demand, pulling out all the stops for the vaccine programme, maximising capacity in all settings to treat non-COVID patients, and committee members will recall that the NHS stood non-essential services down the middle of last year, and we've been slowly bringing them back, and we now have to try and maximise the capacity we've got to be able to carry on with that work. Continuing to manage emergency and winter pressures, supporting the health and wellbeing of our workforce, and believe it or not, the hangovers that are still left over from some of the aspects of Brexit, which will continue for at least another couple of weeks yet. So we have a series of reports that we have to keep providing. So the focus of a lot of people has been on those 6 priorities for this period. The second part of the report then goes on to outline from the 1st of April what are the priorities that we've been asked to look at, and we're still without firm planning guidance just yet. So what we do know is that the financial allocation or the financial regime will roll over for at least the first quarter of the new financial year, and David's just talked about that being on a block contract basis as opposed to a pay by activity basis. We've still not been set out the detail of the planning guidance, but what I have provided is what we know to be the high-level themes that we're going to need to focus on through the whole of the financial year ahead. The first one of those will come as no surprise as recovery from COVID. One of our tallest challenges is going to have to be, how do we tackle the elective care waiting list, which is growing and growing and growing, and it's eye-wateringly growing as well. I could literally suspend every single other part of what the health service does and focus entirely financially on recovering the waiting list, and I think we still probably wouldn't recover it in 12 months. I think we're going to be living with the recovery of the waiting list now for quite some time, and the numbers are very large. And if a few to date committee members want to see what that waiting list looks like, we're more than happy to bring that back. The second priority then is around primary care, and we've got an awful lot to do around the development of primary care as things like primary care networks become more sustained and embedded in our delivery model. We need to spend quite a bit of time helping them to grow and become part of the system in a way that they've never done before. And equally, we've learned a lot through the vaccination programme, and I think we're now starting to get a very clear national understanding of the need to join up community and primary care services outside of hospital. Needless to say, health inequalities, and in another part of this agenda this evening, I'll show you the stark issues with things like the vaccination programme, the impact it has on inequalities. And I personally think, as someone with quite some considerable time in the NHS, health inequalities being back on the agenda is a good thing to see, and it's particularly prevalent in a town like Oldham. We need to make sure that we've got the right people and the right workforce doing the right things, and as we go into a period of change, and that will become more important. And equally, I don't think any of us are under any illusion about the impact that the COVID pandemic will have for younger people, and particularly welcome Councillor Hamblett's comments in another part of the agenda earlier on about transitions. It is extremely important to make sure that our young people and our people in general experience great mental health. And then finally, the sixth priority that we'll be focused on through this year is about integrating services. And there's a white paper that's been published as part of the NHS, and we're looking forward to a potential bill coming forward before the summer recess to take the NHS forward into that next stage. And I suppose put in black and white terms, what I'm suggesting to members, or what I'm saying to members, the national direction is that we're about to enter a period of change once again, which I think should build very much on the type of healthcare model we've been putting in place across Greater Manchester and specifically in Oldham over the last 4 years. But it will be challenging because there is more to do. The final part of the paper, or before we get to the final part of the paper, the middle part of that paper then kind of just tries to lay out a little bit more for committee members what the national activity expectations will be against some of our major targets. So elective outpatients, elective inpatients, and referral rates are all the kind of typical headline reports that you see in the newspapers for the amount of people waiting, the amount of people not being seen or being seen. And of course, the emergency department 4-hour target still remains a national priority. So we've broken all the activity down into a series of things that will take place over the next 6 months, and it's there for all to see. The final part of the paper, at a really, really high level, seeks to just lay out what our plan is a health and care system working together in Oldham over the next 12 months, really, to start to bring together services in a way that we've not done before. That's probably the most exciting part of the whole of this plan. It's absolutely the most exciting piece of work I think that exists in the health and care system right now. I've certainly been in pursuit of an integrated care system in my career for the past 12 years, and I think we finally might get in place something that will actually do what it says on the tin, as long as we can get a supportive bill coming out of the white paper. That shouldn't detract us from the work that we've been doing across GM in a devolved system. It should be an opportunity for us to build and grow upon the platform that we've already built in that Greater Manchester system, and we very much see a couple of things happening now. So members will probably understand that we have something called a joint commissioning board or a commissioning partnership board, where we make joint decisions about commissioning services across the local authority and the CCG. We very much envisage the CCG disappearing on the 1st of April 2022, and the system being replaced with a new locality system board that brings all the different partners together into a single new organisational form. And rather than try and blow everybody's minds tonight with that, because I think with more pressing items of business on tonight's agenda, I would very much make the offer, if the committee is welcoming of that, to come back and give a more detailed briefing about the white paper and the plans that we have in place as we move through this next period of time. Some members will have been in the room before, perhaps in a more political space, when myself and the lead cabinet member for health and social care have briefed on what some of those changes look like, and we've been diligently now working across the system to start to enact some of those. And myself and Councillor Chow at the Greater Manchester Joint Commissioning Board earlier this afternoon, where we talked very much about the white paper across the 10 localities and the implications of it. So I think it should be a strand of this committee's time, as you know, we're certainly going to see the abolition of the CCG in Oldham and the replacement of a different vehicle orchestrated from GM, but working in partnership in localities, and it is quite complicated but quite exciting at the same time. There is nothing more to add to the paper. It's a pretty factual paper. It probably leads to a lot more areas of questions and ponderings than it does really answer a great deal of exciting things. But I think the third part of that paper is the bit where this committee probably needs to focus over the next 12 months in some aspects. I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you for that, Mike. Are there any comments or questions? Mike? We're echoing. Councillor Ibrahim, and then.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mike. Okay. Firstly, thank you for everything that you've done, Mike, across the CCG. Like you said in your report, getting back to normal is going to take us quite a while. We've had a tough 12 months, not only in Oldham but nationally as well. But I'm sure with the great staff that we've got working across the NHS, we'll get there. But like I say, great thanks goes to all the staff that we've got working across the NHS, from nurses to receptionist staff to the staff at pharmacies. It's been a tough year. I'd just like to ask about the vaccination programme, please. Can I ask, have you got the take-up figures?
That's the next item.
Oh, is that the next item? I'm sorry. Am I reaching that one?
Item.
All right, sorry. Have we?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
can I save that one for the next item?
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you wait until then?
Yeah, I will do. Sorry, I thought we were covering it in this one.
Yeah,
I'll wait.
Councillor McLaren, then Councillor Elias, unless you got another question to relate to this item.
No, that's all then. I'll just thank the NHS staff and yourselves for your work that you've done.
I think everyone echoes that on the committee. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'd first of all like to echo Councillor Abraham's thanks, Mike, through you to all the staff who've worked so heroically during the past 12 months just to keep our health service up and running, as it were. Yeah. The sad fact is, though, that we're left with another huge challenge, which you've touched upon, in terms of managing the waiting list, which is, as you say, is growing. Probably back as we sit, as it were, having this discussion. However, so what planning, is in place at the present time? That, I mean, COVID-19 is unfortunately still a variable within the system. Though thankfully, the number of cases appears to be falling substantially, but there's no knowing yet what the future might hold. Whether in fact we might be in lockdown 4 next autumn or something of that ilk. Hopefully not, but. What plans are being put in place to sort of manage the waiting list, as it were, in order to prioritise, for example, cancer patients or other long-term conditions that might need to be given some degree of priority in order to manage the process, as it were, whilst we continue to wrestle, if that's the word, with the demands of COVID-19?
That's a really good question, Councillor McLaren, and you partly answer it yourself. There's been a clinical prioritisation piece of work done across the whole of Greater Manchester and nationally, and that prioritisation process has sought to work on the basis those most clinically needful of surgery or planned care are brought forward. And it's a really crude way of describing it, but we broadly categorise them as P1, P2, P3, and 4. Where we're basically looking at things like carpal tunnel syndrome, a kind of sore hand, very painful, but actually it's not going to impact your life chances. They're prioritised now much further down the list, as opposed to, say, elective heart surgery or elective cancer surgery. So, there is very much a very clear focus at Northern Care Alliance's hospitals to treat the most clinically serious conditions first, and that work continues. I think the real issue we've now got, and this was part of today's conversation at the Greater Manchester Joint Commissioning Board, is very much how do we match the capacity that we've got to the list that we've now built up. So, there are multiple issues here. We've got a smaller bed base because we've had COVID patients in and we've had to move beds further apart, less people in hospitals. But we've also got a series of doctors that was what it was before the COVID started, and now we've got a great big list. So, there's only so many resources that go around. I've seen very early drafts of what the planning assumptions need to look like. Again, I think that's something that we can bring back here and be more explicit about. But rest assured, there is a prioritisation process in place, and we are slowly bringing services back as a vehicle to be able to manage that. But there is going to be a gap between capacity and demand, undoubtedly, in my view.
Yeah.
Councillor Alias?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mike. That was a really good presentation. Just my question is on your plan for over the next 6 months, as you say in your report, particularly around health inequalities. I know for many decades now we've had all sorts of health inequality reports and strategies, and you name it, we've had it, and I can see in the section that what you said is that there is an equality strategy being developed by all partners, and whilst I was reading that, I was thinking to myself, yeah, here's another document again, and it'll take next 6 months to write the document, and then somebody else will come up with a new document. So and similarly, on the next line you're saying that there'll be a equity plan as well, which I know you're quite passionate about both of these areas, and ideally as a councillor and as an Oldham resident, I want some concrete action in terms of things being done and put in place to make sure that we overcome some of these inequalities, rather than some of us just sitting somewhere and taking 6 months to write up another strategy that'll probably sit in a shelf somewhere, or look really nice on the website, but there's nothing actually getting done on the ground. So are these strategies what's going to be the difference with these now, and in future could we actually have some reports coming to us where you can actually bring to us what initiatives have been put in place that and what difference they've made, so that we're actually working to reduce these inequalities and not writing more reports and more strategies.
If I may, Councillor, if I ever come to this meeting and talk about narrowing the gap or anything of that nature, you have my permission to kick me up and down the building. This is not about that. I've seen too many of those things. If you look at some of the stuff we've done through the COVID vaccination programme, we put on special clinics for people with autism and LD because we know that they need to respond in that way. We've put vaccination programme in the mosques as a vehicle to be more specific to local community needs. We need to take all of that learning and apply it properly through this year. At the heart of all of this change programme for the next couple of years, I'll make no apologies for saying that you'll hear the phrase population health management an awful lot, because we need to get right down into local communities, understand what is happening in those communities and the experiences that people face, and then planning services in a way that starts to make tangible inputs on a service-based level, not writing strategies in back rooms somewhere, then leaving them on the shelf for people to admire. It's not about that anymore. This is actually about taking very specific needs analysis and looking at what that means in different communities, because it does actually look very different in Oldham in very, very different communities. So I think we therefore need to be prepared and open our minds up to the health service in Oldham will not anymore be in the future about one size fits all. It'll be much more about what are the needs of communities and places, and how can we match the services to those areas and build new services where they're needed. And you'll see in the report there are some elements of making maternity services a little bit more sensitive to family support needs, looking at the use of medicines in very different ways, in some places matched to health checks in a way that we've never previously done before, and taking things like mental health and autism and LD and looking very differently about the needs of different types of our population. So it's a kind of fancy way of saying I think we need to analyse what happens in people's lives a little bit better than what we've previously done, and start to match the services in a way that will make best sense to them. And I suspect there'll be a fair amount of challenges and service changes that we want to come before this committee and talk to you about. So not narrowing the gap, that might be an outcome that we'd like to achieve, but it won't be the language that we use. It'll be about population health change.
Thank you for that, Mike. In terms of not concentrating on, well, basically not mentioning narrowing the gap, because we've heard, like you said, it's been going on for many years and it hasn't actually narrowed the gap. The gap's actually got wider. And we had challenges prior to COVID in Oldham, and obviously those challenges have been exacerbated by COVID now, and that gap would be much larger now than it was, say, 12 months ago. And obviously moving forward, it's important how we actually sort of deal with some of the underlying health issues, as well as the like you said, the waiting list. And I think in the future we would welcome a report on in terms of how we're actually dealing with the waiting list. But again, I don't want to take people off from actually providing the service and coming to us and giving all these reports. If the report is easily available and the data is there, then please do let us know. And it could be that you just send us up-to-date reports and you don't have to come and present at the committee itself unless we need you to do so. Because personally, I think it's more important that we have our NHS staff at the front line getting that care to our population as required. But in terms of the new sort of way of working, the white paper itself, and I think a paper and a discussion on that will be quite useful in terms of how we move forward and how we can actually have an input into that. So as part of the consultation, if this committee is considered part of that, that would be welcome. Are there any other comments or questions that members want to make on this item before we move on to the next one? No? Is the report noted then? Councillor McLaren, you've just
Well, just a couple of suggestions to add to your list, Chair. I mean, Mike talked about the changing face of governance. And I think it would be interesting if we were able to follow that journey, because clearly, as the structure changes, the means by which it's managed will also have to change accordingly. The two have to go together. It's unavoidable. So I think as part of this process, that would be useful. But I think the other thing we need to perhaps consider is the service continues to be people orientated, as it were, patient orientated. So I think it's important that we continue to look at ways in which we share the vision with the wider community in terms of the publicity, etc., understanding the system, how to get from, how to access the system, and so forth, so that we continue to break down the issue about access to A&E and so forth, or access to GP and so on, so that people have a clear map, if you like, as to how they can make best use of the services that are at their disposal.
I mean, that's a good point, Councillor McLaren. I think in the private sector, and especially in the housing sector that I work in, we usually what we call is the customer journey. Yeah. And I think in terms of the NHS, if they can map out how instead of you saying a patient, maybe look at us as customers, how do we actually navigate some of those systems and ensure that navigation is open, transparent, and easier to access.
Right. Yeah,
than
it's
what
about
it
making
is.
the best use of the resources that we have available.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think some of the learning that we can make through the way we've dealt with COVID and how different communities have actually responded to it, and not losing, like you've already alluded to that, Mike, and again not losing that good practice and actually building upon it. And I'm sure that we'll discuss it a bit further in next item. So is this item noted then, members? Yeah. Does any member disagree with it?
Happy to note the item, Chair.
Thank you for that. Item 10 is an update on the COVID vaccination. Over to yourself again, Mike. And if you can give us the up-to-date information rather than...
I was going to say, thank you, Chair. Yeah. With your indulgence, because the vaccine programme rolls out every single day, and there is a statutory requirement for you to publish papers for this meeting at a certain point in time. The papers that have gone out are the position at a certain point in time, which was over a week ago. What I propose to do is just put an updated set of papers on the screen.
If you could do that, that'd be brilliant.
Follow exactly the same format, pretty much, as what's been submitted, just with different numbers, and it'll sort of help me remember those numbers, given there's a lot of them to remember. But there's some key things I want to draw out from this presentation, just to kind of shape and guide your thoughts and deliberations a little bit, a little bit more sharply. So, as you can see, I obviously look at the thing on a daily basis, and this is a weekly highlight report. And I want to start with this particular picture. So I want members to remember this number today, that overall we have administered 90,000 vaccines since the 14th of December in Oldham. That includes first and second doses. So the overwhelming majority of those doses have been first doses at 86,000. And you'll start to now see the number of second doses growing by the day, because we are entering the period of time now where 12 weeks is starting to have elapsed since the 14th of December, and people are now starting to come back in for the second doses. And this chart basically gives you an indication that we're now pretty much running clinics in every single one of our 6 PCN or neighbourhood sites on a weekly basis. These dates being the weekly administration numbers starting from October, and you can see how they grow quite significantly and reduce quite significantly at various different points in time. This for me is probably one of the more interesting charts for where we're currently at. I'm sure members will recall that the government strategy was to protect life, and the vaccination programme was rolled out on the basis of protecting life, and therefore we were told and initiated, starting with the older parts of our population in age terms, simply because they were more prone, more at risk of being at loss of life if they contracted COVID, and therefore there's a heavy emphasis on the first 4 cohorts for the early part of this programme, which was basically all those in the care home, all those who were 80 years and over, not in a care home, similarly 75 years and over, not in a care home, and 70 plus years of age, and also clinically extremely vulnerable. And then we've also been focused on 2 further cohorts for the 65-year-olds and the 16 to 64 with a variety of long-term conditions and complexities. Where we're currently at also now is looking further down the cohorts at 7, 8, and 9, and vaccinations will be taking place. And here's the big numbers. Aggregated off, we've got a very, very high level of uptake for all of our core groups in the first 1 to 4 cohorts, and we've broken that down by each of the different primary care network areas. It is pretty stark that we're at well over 90% now for everybody who's 80 years plus, care home residents, and 75-year-old plus. We're approaching 90% globally for the 70-year-olds and clinically extremely vulnerable, and we're creeping up on a daily basis now, way above 70 odd% for those who are 16 to 64 with multiple conditions, and those who are 65 years plus. We're in a very, very good place, I think, in terms of our peer benchmarks. So what all that tells us is that we've been pretty effective in trying to get people into clinics for those first 4 cohorts. But you'd be forgiven for thinking that was all hunky-dory. It's not quite as simple as that, is it really, as we know. So these are the bits that I think start to really matter once we get to these types of slides in this slide deck tonight. This attempts to break down those vaccinations by ethnic origin, and I mentioned that we've launched 3 pop-up clinics over the past 3 weeks. The first one started at Greengate Street Mosque, then we moved on to the EIC Centre, and then we moved on laterally to the Millennium Centre. And we've run several different clinics in those places. The last one being the Millennium Centre, where we hosted that on Saturday, and there was more than 700 people through a single day running through that clinic. I believe mainly from the Bangladeshi community, and we've started to see the numbers now dramatically increase for the Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities. These were globally down at 40% 2 or 3 weeks ago. Now we've started to reach out into communities, provide more community-focused clinics, and we're starting to see those numbers rise. However, conversely, we now have a way to go against some of the white and black African Caribbean communities that we need to start focusing on and looking dramatically different in those areas. So, what this can tell you is that we started out on a national government vaccination programme under the national rules as they were set, and we had a very high uptake of the white British community. As we've started to understand take-up patterns a lot more, and we've moved into communities by understanding their needs, we start to provide tailored solutions to their needs, we start to see quite dramatic changes in uptake in those communities. However, when you boil all that down and take it to the wards, if you look at this simple picture, the darker the area, the more the vaccine has been taken up. And if you look in Saddleworth South Ward, it's at 92.1% take up in that area against all the first 4 cohorts. And what you can broadly see is the closer you get to the centre of Oldham, the less the uptake is. And that's the bit that we've been focused on for the past 3 weeks now, of trying to raise those take-up numbers, and we are seeing some quite dramatic increases on a weekly basis as we start to reach into those communities and offer additional access points other than their GP surgery. And I know the chair of this committee was particularly keen to see a breakdown by ward of those numbers, and this map shows you that in percentage terms, but then in your bundles, I've also included that in real terms numbers, and you'll see we are starting to see the same pattern week in, week out, really, which is Wormworth Ward, St Mary's, Alexandra Ward are the areas where we've got the most challenging parts of our communities to reach, and that's why we are starting to do things like pop-up clinics at Millennium Centre, at the AIC, and also at Green Great Street Mosque, which broadly are in their area. We've initiated the programme with the Oldham Council of Mosques. We've adapted and developed tailor-made communications where we've got local imams advocating and filming on behalf of their communities, encouraging to take up. We've got clinics that are taking place in the heart of communities and where they live their lives, and we are starting to see a more flavour of how things need to be in Oldham. And when we talk about health inequalities, this next slide is the bit that is the bit I'm most interested in out of everything that you will see tonight. And it's when we look at the first vaccine uptake broken down by ethnicity and also the index of multiple deprivation. And I don't need to tell anybody in this committee that 10 is the least deprived area and 1 is the most deprived area. And you can see in every single age group, those in the most affluent parts of our communities are more likely in higher numbers to take up the vaccine than those in the poorer communities. And I believe we can change this. I believe we can change this incrementally and slowly by working better with the voluntary sector, by understanding the needs of each of those communities, and by trying to develop solutions that are not just simply about turning up at a GP practice, but are about trying to provide the vaccination process in a different, more tailor-made way. It's not easy, and we've seen some changes already in how we do that. And then this particular slide tells a picture in itself that when you look at the numbers in the East primary care network right in the middle here, that also tells you that that's our most affluent area who are more willing to travel to the Etihad. Oldham. So they're more mobile, they're less discerning, they're less bothered about it being local, they want their vaccine irrespective of travel. Whereas in our perhaps more deprived communities, actually local really matters for those people. Probably because access arrangements to places like the Etihad Centre are not as easy, and probably because they tend to live their lives in communities in a way that other parts of Oldham don't. And we, by looking at this type of data, we're starting to ask a lot more questions that perhaps we wouldn't have asked otherwise, and it's leading us into different places of what our solutions need to be. I'm not overly concerned when I look at the south part of our primary care network, you know, Failsworth, right at the border of Manchester, dead easy to get to the Etihad Stadium, which is the mass vaccination site organised by the central government outside of Oldham's control. You'd expect there to be quite an outflow of patients to that centre from the south of the borough, but the east is quite an interesting number. And then we all, you know, we're the best one in the world. You know, it's not a competition, but we all like to know where we are. And this is how Oldham fares across the whole of Greater Manchester. And broadly, what you can see, we're about in the middle of the pack. So we've issued more vaccines than Tameside, more than Bury and Rochdale on a volume basis, but then on a percentage of the population basis, we also fare quite well, and we're just broadly middle of the pack. So, you know, a lot of this is controlled by national supply. It's not necessarily something we have a huge amount of control on, but we are keeping pace in Greater Manchester, and we are doing well in terms of where we need to be. And then, of course, you recall that it wasn't all just about the population, it's about vaccinating health and care workers, frontline health and care workers. And you can see that out of that number, we've got a total eligible staff list of 37,700, and we've got through 29,000 of those, roughly 3/4 of staff. We can't force people to have it, of course, but we would like staff to pick up the vaccine. And it's not just, literally those people who work in the hospital. You can see here, it's people that work in care homes, people who work in mental health services, people who work in the voluntary and independent sector, people who care for others in other settings. And in your packs tonight, that's just broken down into a more detailed list. I won't plan to go through this in any great way, shape or form. So, but broadly, what does all this say in summary? For me, it says that we're doing okay with our vaccination programme. Myself and others in the system are particularly pleased at the progress we're making. That progress is becoming much more tailor-made to individual communities. I don't particularly like the narrative of it's down to ethnic origin in particular. I think it's sensitive to local communities, irrespective of the colour of anybody's skin. It just recognises that people live their lives in different ways, and you can start to see that we have some challenges now emerging in some interesting parts of our communities. Right at the very start of this, one of the highest uptaking groups we had were white Irish people. No explanation as to why that was the case, other than all we could pinpoint it to at a point in time is that there happened to be a church service where it was mentioned and an encouragement of the community to take it up, and that's the only thing we can point it to. Whereas we've now started to do an awful lot of work, and when we've spent quite a lot of time with the council of mosques, who've started to understand some of the very particular issues that exist in those communities. We've made it quite clear to national people that simply providing us with social media collateral with unknown faces advocating for the vaccine is not going to work in places like Oldham. People want to see their local imam or their local community leader advocating and coming out and explaining their take and their view on the science and the medicine surrounding this. And that's why we've taken quite a bit of time to understand those things and start to put in clinics in a way that makes sense. So that was my update for this evening, Chair. I think it's going well. We have an awful lot to do in front of us as we now start to contemplate not just vaccinating people for the first time, but vaccinating people for the first time at the same time as vaccinating people for the second time. And you can see the volume of 90,000. I think my last count of people who actually had COVID in Oldham was about 22,000, something of that nature. So put those two numbers together, 22,000 people roughly who've had COVID and 90,000 people who've had a vaccination already in less than 12 weeks thereabouts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike, for that very comprehensive report. And I think a number of members have already put their hands up. Councillor Ibrahim, I won't make my comments now then, but thank you for sort of getting the numbers to us in a short period of time. And Councillor Ibrahim?
You've got other members that had their hands up before me, so I'll let them go first.
Yeah, your hand. All right. Okay, it's up to you.
That's fine. I'll let them go.
Right, Councillor Alias, and then Councillor 2, and then Councillor Ibrahim. I'll go in the order. They put their hands up then.
Thank you, Chair. And Mike, yeah, that was a really good presentation, and thanks for giving us some really latest numbers as such. My question is initially a comment and then a question and maybe a request. So to me, it seems like, particularly when concerning the BME communities, you need to have the accessibility and information as your key two things in order to get them more engaged, and particularly in this case where we put on vaccination clinics, and people have come in large numbers, and that's I personally think that was mainly to do with accessibility and also the information that was available. But in terms of one of your tables where you showed how wards are doing, and I see obviously one seems to be right at the bottom where EIC is in Werneth ward, but it probably catches not a large area of Werneth. But Medlock and Alexandra seem to be quite low down, and I was just wondering, and if it was possible, maybe to put a clinic on in maybe Honeywell Centre, where you could look at targeting the Eastern European communities as well as some of the BME communities that actually come from Alexandra Ward, Medlock Vale, and also Bay of Werneth.
I totally agree with you, and it's you know, some of this is interesting how the government chose to roll out the vaccination programme. Yeah, I remember at the very start of this, every single building that we were supposed to vaccinate out of had to be CQC registered. Then there had to be a site assurance visit to every single building that was quite intensive. You know, it was all geared up, if I'm being perfectly frank, in a way that I think was quite prohibitive to the sensitivities of local communities. And coming together as Oldham, we've managed to find a way around that. And I think we've managed to find a way around that as quickly as we possibly could. And we're now starting to see the data that shows the effectiveness when we do that. I'm not against any other site to be looked at as a pop-up place. It's part of the proposals we try and look at on a weekly basis with the GPs, who of course are there to deliver the programme themselves. So any suggestions you've got about some of those gaps in communities, we'd more than look at, councillor, and I will make sure that's on our next planning meeting on Tuesday next week.
Thank you for that, Mike. Councillor Tour.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mike, for the wonderful presentation and all the hard work. Just before I ask my questions on Councillor Ilyas's point, it is important to gather the information for the BME community, but also thinking about Medlock Vale, I do agree with the Honeywell Centre, but at the same time in Fitton Hill area, because there are a lot of young families, and that is again a deprived area. So I think we need to think about, like, that's just one example, and I'm sure there's similar cases in other wards as well, where the young families, because of the access issue, that probably be one of the obstacles for them to come forward for the vaccination. The other thing is it's a comment. The Mosque Council, I was involved with. I was helping them out.
Excuse me, Chair, can we just pause a minute? We appear to have gone offline. If colleagues are still here from New Image,
you can just hold on, please.
Right,
offline now.
It might be my laptop. It's saying an error has occurred.
Right. Okay. We'll carry on then. Councillor Tour, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I was involved with the Mosque Council, and they especially organising women's BME women's information sort of event, but I think it was a lot of hard work was done behind the scene before we actually had the session for women to come and attend. But it was a lot of, like, through not only the social media, but like through personal contacts like WhatsApp groups, mosque groups, even for them to come, that is safe enough for them to come and have the information. And then there was a lady doctor on the day, and there was a lot of women-related issues on which she sort of answered a lot of queries, and it was very successful. And I think it'll be only fair if we can have that kind of the information. I'm sure there'll be a lot of women, even though it's a high uptake, but there's not only the BME women, but just women in general. They will have lots of questions. So I think it'll be just good to organise something for women only, in a safe environment where they can ask questions with a female doctor if possible. Thank you.
And I think you really put into sharp context, councillor, how this conversation quite easily can just turn into the concept of BAME, and actually there's a lot of other issues, you know, male and female. I've been constantly surprised and impressed at just how much local community have let us into their world by letting us put messages in their WhatsApp groups in a way that we ordinarily wouldn't be able to get messages to. And I'm not blind to the Council of Mosques. It is a very male-dominated conversation, and we need to do more, I think, to women's groups in Oldham. So I wholly support that request, and perhaps a conversation offline about how we can perhaps pick that up between us, I think, would be very welcome from my point of view.
And that's fine. More than happy to have a discussion.
Councillor Ibrahim.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mike, for your presentation. I'll get back to my question now. In your presentation, you gave us the figures for the vaccination take-up by wards in percentages. But I was just wondering, is it possible to get the figures by the age in the BAME communities? Because at the pop-up sites, because I've been at the Greengate Street Mosque on a couple of occasions, and I've been involved in the engagement as well on the doorsteps. And I was driving past the Millennium Centre, and I have seen quite a different range of age groups at the centres, and I feel that we may not be getting the right age groups and the priority high risk groups that we should be getting at the vaccination centres. I'm not sure. So
I'll definitely get you that data. That data is not hard to give you, actually. I'm absolutely crystal clear that we've got the right age groups. The bit I would encourage you to just think about is that we are also at times trying to balance no wastage. And there were some clinics where we managed to completely fill them with all of the target cohorts. So let's just say that was 80-plus-year-olds. There are other times where it gets really difficult to try and reach all of the people on the lists that we've got are 80+, and therefore we encourage the GPs to drop down to the next cohort in the interest of filling the clinic. I'm trying to not be political about all of this, given my role in the system, but I can't really help some of it. But perhaps this would have been a very different approach if there wasn't such a heavy and sole focus on purely mortality. If the emphasis had been much more on outcomes and volume with some criteria next to it about protecting life, I think we might have found a very different approach. So, for example, we're in a point in time now where we've got the Etihad Stadium offering vaccines completely outside of the GPs. People are directly contacted by the NHS nationally, as opposed to their local GP. The local GP cannot see who's been asked by the Etihad Stadium. So we've got this system where you've potentially got people booked on 2 clinics, and they'll make a choice when it suits them. So you just get someone who declines without saying anything to the local GP practice. Concentrating all the older people right at the very start and use the mass vaccination centre on, say, cohort 10. If that makes sense. That's not the strategy we've got in place. So I think, we learn as we go along with these things. But I've no doubt in my mind that we've had people who will have been vaccinated of the official cohort priority in the interests of making sure there was no vaccine wasted. And I'd rather there was no vaccine wasted.
Oh yeah, of course. No, I just want to get a sort of a balance. So if you've got them figures, I mean, it just gives us an idea of whether we've got that target and we've got as many people in that priority group vaccinated. I mean, if we haven't, is there a different approach that we can use? Is there another way of trying to get those people into these pop-up centres and get them on board sooner rather than later?
I totally agree, and I will get you the numbers.
Yeah, thank you. That's all I just wanted to try and see if we are missing anyone out, then we need to try and get them in sooner rather than later, especially the ones in the high priority groups. We need to try and aim at them as well sooner than working further down the priority groups. That's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, and I suppose to answer that question a bit more directly, there is a call and recall process in place. So people are constantly calling an escalation route into that. So once it gets to so many calls, if they've not managed to find a way into a clinic, it's actually a doctor that makes the call and has the conversation. We don't think vaccine hesitancy is as deep as what we originally thought at the start of this. We think there's more to it than just that.
Yeah. Councillor 2, is that legacy hand or have you indicated again? Right. Okay. I think the vaccination hesitancy, I think we thought it was a major issue. I think the issue was around communication, I think, and how actually people can actually book onto the system itself. Some people were actually struggling to book them because they were getting a text message from the GP and then they were having to book on. And obviously, in some instances, like I've said it previously, those messages weren't going directly to the actual person who was supposed to be taking the vaccination, and those messages weren't being passed on. And then the other issue was around people not having the skills to actually book onto the system itself as well. And then the NHS contacting people directly. I think people have had some issues there. Their local GP hasn't contacted them, but the NHS have. And every time they went onto the system, they were being offered appointments far away from where they live. And they were saying, hold on. And then they were contacting their GP, and GP was saying, I can't give you, but I can give you an example of somebody that I know who contacted myself, and she's over 65. The NHS, she received an NHS letter, and she was contacting her own GP, and they were saying, look, we can't really give you an appointment at the moment, but that particular practice was contacting people over 60 by then as well, but for some reason she was being missed out. So I encouraged the family. I said, look, you've got family members who can drive, just book yourself at the Etihad and get the vaccination done, and they've actually done that. But these are some of the examples where where that hesitancy actually came from. Personally, myself, I'm a numbers person, as you might have imagined, and because of our tight resources, I just want to make sure that we're actually targeting our energy and our resources towards where we can actually make the biggest difference. And that's why I actually asked for these figures, to make sure that we're actually doing that. And for me, I'm a bit concerned about Wornath Ward itself, because if you look at Wornath Ward, lowest vaccination take up, but yet we've got the highest infection rate. And the two, and obviously if we can get majority of the population vaccinated in Wornath, the infection rate for Oldham would come down, because that's where most of it's. That's my assumption. I might be wrong, but and I think somehow we need to look at other alternatives. Yes, the IEC is a brilliant venue, etc. I've got no issues with that. But in terms of accessibility, say for example, people living in Top Coppice or in Top Wornath Freehold, and I think I've mentioned a few sites there in terms of St Thomas Church itself, which is right in the heart of Coppice itself. And it's a yes, it's a church, but the Muslim community actually used it for many different community events. And personally, I think people will access it, no doubt whatsoever. And the actual church is just recently been renovated itself, and it's got different access to it. There's 3 or 4 different doors that we can use, so people can go in from one entrance, come out the other entrance, etc. And obviously we've got 2 other community centres. One's at Primrose Bank and the other one's in Freehold itself. And I think we've got a window of about 3 weeks for the Wornath community. I think in terms of once Ramadan starts, if you think the vaccination take up is low now, it's going to dramatically decrease during Ramadan, and people will be less reluctant to break their fast and take up the actual vaccination. And the other point I wanted to make was in terms of the good practice that's actually being carried out over the last couple of weeks, because I attended a GM Scrutiny health meeting a couple of weeks ago, and at that time Oldham had the lowest vaccination take up, and now we're in the middle. So there's obviously great improvements that have been made, and let's keep that momentum going, and I hope that good practice is noted and we don't lose it. And there's a lot more that we can actually do, but we shouldn't put all of our eggs in one basket. and look at other ways of how we can actually get to our different communities. And one other thing that I wanted to make sure is that we don't badge these up as a BME issue. I think that if we drill down into the numbers, I think it will be a deprivation issue. People in deprived communities, regardless of their ethnicity, colour, etc., for some reason, they're less reluctant to take the vaccination. I don't know why. They've been affected the most by the infection, but for some reason, they're actually believing what they read on WhatsApp, Facebook, social media, etc., that people are coming out with some nonsense which has no sort of evidence whatsoever. And I've been a bit reluctant in terms of us members actually making a video. I've not done one myself so far. The reason being is that people out in the community expect us to be saying that. I want people from within the community to take a lead on this. Some lay members, to be honest with you, are coming forward saying, I've had my vaccination and I've had no side effects. Yeah, people do have side effects. My son had a side effects to it. I didn't. So there are, and I think it depends on which vaccination you take as well. I think the AstraZeneca one is giving people more side effects. I might be wrong, but the Pfizer one isn't, because I've got two family members who've had AstraZeneca, and then we've had 3 members who've had Pfizer. It might be in our family genes, maybe. The Pfizer ones haven't had any side effects, but the AstraZeneca ones did. But those side effects were minimal. They only lasted a day or so, and they were just like basically temperature chills and etc. So, and I think I'll stop there. I think Councillor Alias has got his hand up. I don't want you to respond to what I've said, Mike, if you don't want to.
Let me just come back on 1 or 2 points, because I think it would help. So I think it was, I think that was such an impassioned speech, almost, Councillor Akhtar.
It wasn't unprepared. Off the cuff.
And I think the community will be grateful and thankful for that type of passion in those that represent them. I think everything you just said, I completely endorse. I fully support. I think the more we've got the vaccine and rolling it out, the better and stronger it gets. There are some things I've fundamentally disagreed with. One of them being given 48 hours notice of 950 vaccines arriving in a particular site and only having 3.5 days to get rid of it, and having no alternative but to text and phone people into clinics. It's not the most appropriate way of doing it, in my view. But we've learned, and we're now looking at least 2 weeks in advance in most occasions, which is more helpful. The vaccine itself, I do just want to sort of, there is no hard and fast rules, as far as I could tell. Maybe Councillor Ibrahim, who works in community pharmacy, might have a different take, but the Pfizer vaccine is basically a messenger vaccine. It tells your body to do something and it does something. The AstraZeneca vaccine doesn't work that way. In simple terms, puts an antibody into you to fight the vaccine in a different way. So I know people who've had minor adverse reactions to AstraZeneca and minor adverse reactions to Pfizer. I couldn't for 1 minute tell you why that's the case for each of those. They're broadly fit and healthy people, but it's certainly not done anything other than give them a bit of an unpleasant arm or a bit of a chill or a bit of a sore head, and then needed a bit of a lie down for a couple of hours. I do agree with you about Werneth. The next part of our focus has to be about asking those questions, Councillor, about why, what's the connection, what difference would that make, how do we target that? And it may well be that actually what we need to do is think a little bit differently, and maybe is a focus on things like taxi drivers and vocational working groups that we need to try and reach, as opposed to just static parts of community, if that makes sense. So I think everything we do to ask more and more questions, the better.
I think if you look at the demographics, I mean, I represent Werneth, as you know. If you look at the demographics of Werneth is more of a diverse area than most other wards across Oldham. Obviously, if you look at where Coldhurst is predominantly Bangladeshi, St Mary is predominantly Pakistani, whereas Werneth, and to a lesser extent probably Medlock and then Alexandra, are actually more diverse, and we've got people from different ethnic groups living in these wards, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, etc., and obviously the new European community as well, and Roma community. So I think we need to look at how we can actually, maybe we probably need to do some door knocking, similar to that we did for the infection rates in those areas, and get other partners on board and get our boots on and go out there, to be honest with you.
And we have one single team now that's doing the door knocking for testing as well as vaccination. So we brought the two things together, invested in it, and we now have a single approach to that, which is significantly helping us.
But we've not, as local members, we've not been approached when these teams go out, and maybe actually having us when we can. Obviously, we won't be able to go every day, but when we can, that'd be useful, I think.
Yeah. Okay, I'll raise that with Neil Constantine in the morning, Councillor.
Yeah. Councillor Alias, and then Councillor Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Throughout the pandemic, we've seen how Oldham's communities, particularly the voluntary community sector, have come together with our mainstream services to bring about a really positive impact in Oldham. And I was just wondering, I think Mike is probably the right person to do this, is to maybe build this into some of our commissioning contracts and things like that, to make sure that the services that win contracts to deliver some of the community services in particular, have positive partnerships with the community and voluntary sector organizations within those areas, because this last 12 months has taught us how important the sector is and how good the sector is in engaging with people that are not otherwise engaged by the mainstream services, and how quickly and in a better, effective way we can deliver those services. So if we can build that into our commissioning processes and contracts and things, I think that will hopefully help us to reduce inequalities as well as have better performing services.
I totally agree. We've done a little bit of that, and we need to build on it and learn from it. And the vaccine program and the pandemic is giving us, if there is a silver line in these things, then it's those kinds of initiatives that help us do things a little bit differently, that help generate local wealth and capacity. I agree.
Sorry, Councillor Byrne, I was on silent.
She disappeared.
I know, she's pressed the wrong button, I think.
I know, I pressed the wrong one. Sorry about that.
I thought you were going to appear here next to me. That would have been fun.
This debate has really focused my mind. Whilst I live in Saddleworth South and my ward is Saddleworth North, we do have areas of deprivation, not like there are in the middle of Oldham. However, these are areas where quite a lot of people walk everywhere. They don't have cars, they do, and it's made me think about if the figures, when we get to a lower age group, say, 20 to 35, if they start to drop, we'll have to learn a lesson from everyone else as to how we get people vaccinated if they are unable to get to somewhere else. And I'm really pleased that we've had this debate, because it does put another aspect on what might be thought of as affluent wards and everybody having cars and rushing off to get vaccinations, which most of them are. But we're getting now to that age group of single mums and single dads, that sort of thing. So I'm very pleased to have learnt from all of you what you've gone through, and I think that should that happen in Saddleworth North and South, at least I'll know about it. Thank you.
Thank you. There's pockets of deprivation everywhere, to be honest with you, and it's how we actually help those individuals and families. Mike, do you want to comment on that? Or
I totally agree. Well, I totally agree, and I think there's a real danger that we just equate inequality as being about, ethnicity. It's actually much more complex than that, and fascinating, isn't it? We may be needing to look very seriously at single mums in the not too distant future and the problems that they have in reaching it, whereas right now the focus is very much on geography and ethnicity, and I think we're gonna have this dilemma as we keep going through this kind of wave of a program. I think the beauty that's come out of all of this is really starting to understand about the power of neighbourhoods and communities. Imagine if the health service was just purely run from Whitehall. It would not work, would it really?
Well, they don't understand the local community, do they? So I think obviously the vaccination rollout has been a real sort of example of how different communities respond differently. And like I said to you before, I don't want this to become a colour issue like we did with the vaccination rates. People started blaming the BAME community for increasing rates, etc. And then some people might be reading, 750 people taking the vaccination at Millennium Centre, or why are they targeting the BAME community, etc. I think that if we move the agenda towards deprived communities, and that means people of all colours, etc. And I think that is the issue, to be honest with you. If we looked at the numbers, if you did a deep dive, that's what I think personally it will show up, that it's more linked to deprivation than actually colour, etc. And the hesitancy is down to people's actual skills of how they can actually book online, and that's a major factor. People are not digitally included. So
you are completely right, Councillor. And that chart I showed you that goes from 10 to 1 in every single ethnic category. There is more in the deprived area that are taking it up in less numbers in every single one. So that's a very, very clear statement.
Right, is there any other comments on this particular issue? Is the report noted then? Any members disagree? No? Mike, thank you very much for spending your Tuesday evening with us. And if you can take one message back from our committees to thank all the staff and the members that have actually been involved over the last 12 months or so during these challenging times. A big thank you to them all. And we're very, 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 very grateful to all the hard work that they've carried out on our behalf, and we'll carry on doing so. Thank you very much, and
thank you.
Please do come again.
I always love your company, councillors. I'll be back here next meeting. Don't you worry.
Thank you.
Have a lovely evening. Thank you.
You as well. Thanks. Cheers. Bye. Right. Swiftly moving on. Sorry, guys, the meeting's been dragged on a bit today, but we have some really important items that needed discussing. So quickly moving on to item 11, which is the council motion on ban on fast food and energy drink advertising. Can I ask Mark Hardman to introduce the report, please?
I will be very brief, Chair. You gave this detailed consideration at 2 meetings last year, and you made recommendations to the cabinet about progressing these issues on a Greater Manchester-wide basis, and paragraph 1.6 in the report, the cabinet have agreed to take forward those issues at the Greater Manchester level. So on that basis, it's suggested in the report that you might wish to consider your consideration of this matter concluded and report to council accordingly. Cabinet have offered to report back in due course, so that could be included on the work programme.
Yeah, I think we should report back to the council. That's the recommendation. And do any members have any sort of questions on the report before we move?
Move the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Is that seconded?
Seconded, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Alias. So as this proposal to refer the item to council, I think we're required to take a vote on this. So can I ask the clerk to read out the members' names, please? And for members to indicate whether they are voting for, against or abstaining.
Councillor Elliott,
For.
Councillor Byrne,
For.
Councillor Hamblett. Oh, apologies.
Left, I think.
He's left the meeting.
Councillor Ibrahim,
For.
Councillor McLaren,
For.
Councillor Tour,
For.
and Councillor Akhtar.
For. That's unanimously carried, so it'll be, we'll take it to the council meeting then in one of the future meetings. Item 12 relates to the council motion on not every disability is visible. And again, can I ask Mark Hardman to introduce the report?
Yes, yes, Chair. You gave this detailed consideration at your meeting in December, and if you'll recall, there was a representative from Crohn's and Colitis UK present as well, and you made recommendations to the relevant portfolio holder, which we took to be the leader in this case with his corporate property role, and the officers and deputy chief executive identified in that regard to consider costings up for the provision of signage on accessible toilets, and also for the provision of a changing places toilet at Spindle Shopping Centre. Paragraph 1.5, the leader gave his support to the costing upward proposals, and we've had advice from the Director of Economy that signage has been installed on accessible toilets. Information's being shared with the council's partners for them to consider their involvement in this initiative. More publicity about council toilets and accessible toilets has been placed on the website, and that the estates team are aware that any building now undergoing major refurbishment is required to have a changing places toilet. That's now law, and that includes awareness for the Spindle Shopping Centre. So again, suggested that with those responses, it does appear that you might consider that your considerations of this matter are now concluded, and it would be an appropriate time to report to council accordingly.
Thank you for that, Mark. As Mark has said, we've made some really good positive sort of progress on this item, and it just shows how, as a committee, the difference that we can actually make to some of the issues that our residents face on a daily basis. And this is a really good example of how a scrutiny committee should work and recommend items. I was going to go to it. Do any members have questions on the report? Councillor McLaren and then Councillor Tour.
Well, I was just going to move the recommendations, Chair, if that's okay. As you say, we've done some work on this in the past, and it's good to see that it's proved to be successful. And as you say, it shows that scrutiny can have an effective role. Yep.
Councillor Tour.
Thank you, Chair. I just had to ask this question. I'm not sure if it's relevant to this one, but correct me if it's not. But it's a really good report. But there's only one thing I was thinking: is there for breastfeeding, is there any signage up for that as well? I know we're talking about disability. Is it a separate thing?
That's a separate thing that's already in place from for many years, to be honest with you. And I'm pretty sure there's actually a room at the Civic and at the Spindles as well, and I've got the scars to actually show for that as well, because when I was a deputy leader, I think I had responsibility for I can't remember which what
sorry, but just wanted to make sure.
It's just reminded me that we had an issue at the Civic Centre when a mother visited the Civic Centre one-stop shop, and for some reason she was told that she couldn't breastfeed there, and that made it into the press not only did it become a local issue, but actually a national issue and then an international issue. And I was personally racially abused over it, as if I made that comment to that particular mother. And obviously, I had to go into the press and say, look, my mother breastfed myself. So why would I have an issue with breastfeeding as an ethnic person? So I think in terms of breastfeeding, that's in place already. But if it is,
we have invited, Chair, we have invited moms. I think it was during our Merrily year. All the breastfeeding mom. They was invited in Mayor's Parlour. They was also had that tour in the chamber. They actually sat on the Mayor's chair. So yeah, I think we just wanted to make sure that's
I think that's already in place. But so, do you want to second that recommendation then, Councillor Tour, or anybody else?
Yeah. I'll second that.
Yeah. Thank you. And again, as this is a proposal to refer an item to council, we are again required to take a vote. Can I ask the clerk to read members' names and for members to indicate whether they are voting for, against or abstaining?
Councillor Elias?
For.
Councillor Byrne?
For.
Councillor Ibrahim?
For.
Councillor McLaren?
For.
Councillor Tour?
For.
And Councillor Akhtar?
For. Again, that item's unanimously carried, so I'll go to the full council meeting. Item 13, the next sport is the Health Scrutiny Committee work programme. And after today's meeting, I think that work programme is going to be going to get bigger and bigger. Mark, do you want to present the report to us?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, the report itself does note that Mike Barker did offer a meeting with the Chair, Vice, and any other members to discuss health scrutiny work programme going forward. And I think that tonight's meeting, where we've touched on the white paper, a brief on the white paper, look at the Northern Care Alliance transaction programme, looking at the waiting list, the CCG. It's and NHS structural change coming up. There's a lot of business there to consider, and there are other CCG related items on the work programme. So the work of this committee isn't just about the CCG, about the NHS. There are other parts. So it is going to be an interesting time, and we are going to have a look at the work programme over the coming months. That does link into the just to the new overview and scrutiny arrangements that council agreed it last June, and the recommendation going to council that they're implemented from the start of the next municipal year. I think just in terms of the work programme itself, just one update arising from the Northern Care Alliance discussion at the last meeting on employment and training opportunities. Members did have the follow-up meeting on the 8th of March. I circulated by email some headline outcomes from that meeting. Rather than repeat them now, I will incorporate them into the outturn work programme for the committee going forward. I think that's all I've got to report on this evening, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Do any members have questions on the report? No. Is the report recommends that the work programme to be noted? Is it noted?
How would you note the
Does any member disagree? Thank you. The report is noted. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for their questions. And that concludes the business for this evening. Thank you very much for the whole of the evening and for the whole of the meeting. And I think we've had a really good meeting today.